And I'd just like to pick up Tanya's conversation about the social contract, because I share that quite wholeheartedly, and I think that's the driver of it. And without wanting to speak to the converted, I'd actually indicate that question about the social contract is actually taxing many people's minds at the moment. And I'm reminded, and I put up quite often in my presentations, a Financial Times editorial coming out in April 2020. And so that was, just at the start of the pandemic. And the key thing was it was written by the Financial Times, and that's a UK newspaper for, dare I say, the business people who tend not to be overly concerned about inequality or any of those other measures. I'm stereotyping, obviously, but I do find it quite clear and quite informative that the Financial Times can come out with an editorial at the time which says, and it's headlined, "Virus lays bare the frailty of the social contract," literally using your words, Tanya. And I think that coming from that sphere is quite a clear signal that things are, dare I say, broken in that contract between community, people, and the economy and business. And we've got to start thinking about what does that social contract mean, and dare I say, in the context of Aotearoa in the 21st century. And one of the recommendations in terms of our inquiry, while we don't specify I'm just trying to flick through to the actual wording of it, establish and maintain measures describing a social flaw that will enable us to embed in a social contract. Now, what is that social flaw? Well, we argue in the report that it could be, you can come at it from two perspectives. One, from the clear business perspective or the economy perspective. You need to ensure that there's that you have your social license to operate, so that you have the acceptance to be here as a business and I can engage with community and employ people. Or you can come at it from a rights-based perspective. Other people come at it from a rights-based perspective. But irrespective of what that perspective is, there are elements of that social flaw that we as a nation need to discuss and establish. Do we have a right to a house? Do we have a right to X amount of food? Do we have a right to a job? All of those sorts of things. Some people will say yes or no to those. Sometimes that's implicit, but I think somewhere in there now is a time to be explicit. But even if you take the rights-based perspective, what's the other side of the equation? What's the obligations coming back the other way? So as a society, I have, or may have, as being relatively privileged, I have an obligation to ensure that as an employer, that I employ my people properly. I pay them a proper wage. I look after them in terms of health and safety. The contribution coming back is that I expect my employees and my workers to be engaged in the work and to be healthy and all of those sorts of things, and bring to me their issues if they're not. But whereabouts at that community level? So in terms of driving our other recommendations, one of the core principles, obviously that social contract is one of them, about trying to rebalance that power imbalance. The core principles that drove our recommendations, one was to strengthen the influence of Te Tiriti. We've got to recognise and understand that Te Tiriti is the foundation for that social contract. Empower the voices of people and communities experiencing persistent disadvantage, but they're the voices that are not being heard in designing the system, let alone the interventions. And Wellington bureaucrats like myself don't have all the answers, and it's time for us to actually admit we don't have the answers. The answers are out there in their communities. Much of the work that Tanya and her colleagues are doing, that signal where the answers are. We need to empower those. Other element, the short-term, long-term stuff, we need to value long-term investments. And lastly, we need to integrate the learning and evaluation. So we need to try stuff and learn from it and figure out whether it works. And not, if it doesn't work, not start pointing fingers, but if it doesn't work, figure out how we can learn from that and design new programs, rather than this blame game. Rather than, oh, it didn't work, so I'm going to take your contract away from you because you didn't deliver. If we're serious about long-term investment, we've got to have much longer-term contractual models, if that's the right word, or models of delivery that actually enable communities to design their own programs. And the other well, not the other, but the one other key core recommendation that I'd like to put in front of you is that long-term stuff, embed in the system a voice for the longer term. We recommend the establishment of a parliamentary commissioner for future generations. So we have that, literally, we have that voice of the future at the decision-making table.